Spiritual Enlightenment Revisited. I like to include how-tos in the talks that I give, and I give an illustration of some spiritual principle, and then here's how you might apply it to some situation that you're involved in your daily life. And what I'd like to address today is how to think of your spiritual path, how to think of your spiritual journey. Because from the input that I have gotten over the years, and it's been substantial, is that most people feel, or many people feel, they're on the verge of a breakthrough, and yet they have had that feeling for quite a while. I know when I first discovered unity, it gave me a lot of hope that it wouldn't be long before I would be fully illuminated and enlightened, and that would change a lot of the way my life unfolds. But as I talked about last week, it's life pretty much stays the same. It's the chop wood, carry water thing, before you're enlightened and after. But I think that we have a lot of misunderstanding about what spiritual enlightenment is. And you can actually approach it from two different ways. There's two ways to look. There's more than that, of course, but generally we look at it in two ways. Actually, we look at it mostly in one way. Spiritual enlightenment is like a line that we cross at some point. We get enough understanding where we cross this threshold and we're enlightened. We become a Jesus-like figure or a Buddha-like figure or some type of figure. And it's interesting to note that the Buddha was very involved in a number of spiritual disciplines, very stringent disciplines. including fasting to the point where he almost starved himself to death. And he finally gave all that up, and many of his followers thought that was horrible for him to do that. But his conclusion was to just be still, sit in silence and listen. And that's where his moment of illumination occurred. But what we tend to think is that he was illumined in that moment, and from that moment he went on through his life as this illumined individual, whatever that means. And there are a lot of people that do this. You'll read of some of the mystics that have a real struggle with the whole spiritual thing. St. Francis was one. And he was very involved, very interested in war and all kinds of things as a youth, and was walking down the road one day and saw a dilapidated chapel and went in and heard a voice that he was to fix that. He was to rebuild that church, rebuild that. I don't know if the voice meant the building or the whole church, but he had a moment where he did cross a barrier, and he wasn't the same after that. And that's how we normally think of illumination, enlightenment. And there's other examples of that. A more recent one is Eckhart Tolle. He tells his story up to the point of his 29th year, I believe. He was totally depressed and had contemplated suicide as kind of a regular way of his thinking. He had no accomplishments, he had no girlfriends, as he said, had nothing except depression. And he fought this depression every day, and late one night, he said to himself, I can't live with myself anymore. And it was like he reached the end of his rope. And he started thinking about what he had just said to himself. I can't live with myself. He said, there's an I, and there's the self I can't live with. So what is that? And just that bit of thought caused him to see himself in a different way. The I that he could not, or the self that he could not live with, he said, was his own invention. It was the result of that voice that's chattering all the time in our heads, the voice I'm talking about. It's not the still small voice, it's that loudmouth, obnoxious, the very opinionated whatever, it's got an opinion about everything. And it's always telling us what to do. And he realized that was the self he couldn't live, that was the part of himself he couldn't live with, but the other part, what's that? And so he said the next day he felt very light and just looked around the room, and all of the mundane things that were normally mundane, they had a new shimmer to them. And he says he has not stayed in that state constantly, but it was enough to change his entire life. And I understand that experience. But I think what we do is we put this price on enlightenment that doesn't really belong. Let's just get into this. And I'm using this scripture that I refer to a lot, and I really like it. There's a lot of ways you can approach it, but we're going to use it in a slightly different way today. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. See, that's two sentences, and it would be very easy to pass over what that might mean to us on a spiritual level. But I think it's one of the most profound statements. It's not necessarily one of the most comforting, although I think it is very comforting when we look at it in the right light. But it's just two short lines. And I've gotten many miles of use out of it. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. It's Matthew 13:44 for those of you that are watching us on YouTube. So there's a couple of things we want to look at here. A key to understanding Jesus' use of the word heaven. It lies in its reference to the vast expanse of the open sky. There's some other Greek meanings to expand and so forth that are very appropriate also. But if we just think of this as we normally think of heaven, a place in the sky, we get the best feeling for this vastness under the clear night of the sky, a sky filled with stars. So you could see why the sky would be an excellent metaphor for infinity, for heaven. We don't see the end of anything. What we're looking at when we look up at our blue sky is the atmosphere. And when you look at the night sky, we don't know what we're looking at. It's so vast that it's incredible to think that, the stars that we're actually looking at, we're looking at them as they were like several million years ago. They're so far away, it takes the light a long time to get to us. I think, isn't it the sun that's 8 minutes? Something like that. It takes 8 minutes for the sunlight to hit us. So we're not even looking at seeing the sun as it is. We're seeing it as it was 8 minutes ago. But the point is, you can see why, especially the ancients, why they would say God is in heaven, in the sky. You see why they would use that metaphor. Back in that day, there was no hope that they would ever get up there, that they would be able to explore that. So it was the unknown. It would always be the mystery. And there's something about that, that's important to keep a level of mystery in this thing we call God, this thing we call study of heaven and, the whole spiritual life. You can't grasp infinity. You can't grasp the infinite. That's why it's important in our prayer work, when we're looking at a problem and we're thinking about, we're praying for a solution, but our mind's really focused on a certain outcome or how we think it ought to happen. But if you think, we live in this vastness, this infinite possibility, and all things are possible, things we're not even thinking about can begin to unfold, and maybe are or probably are unfolding at this very moment, even as we're sitting in prayer. Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe you've received it. And then we add this or something better. But you see why the sky would be such an excellent metaphor. But then to take that literally is a problem. And that's what has actually happened. As I said a couple weeks ago, one of my friends is sure that the rapture is about to happen, and that's that Jesus will come down out of the sky, and out of the clouds and fix all of our problems. And I guess now would be a pretty good time if he's going to do it. It's like, hurry up, And they've been saying that, people have been waiting and waiting and waiting, but if you actually read the gospel accounts of references to that, they were all expecting it to happen any day. They were saying, Jesus said, there's some of you that are standing here that won't taste death before the kingdom. You see the Son of Man coming in the, whatever, on his throne or whatever. It's like it was, or you won't pass through all of the cities in Israel before, this happens. And they were just sitting, waiting, with bated breath for this kingdom to come. And they were looking up to the sky, for it. And that's how Acts, there's a section in Acts that talks about Jesus ascending, going up, and everybody's standing there looking up in the sky, and angel comes by and says, what are you looking at? What are you looking up there for? And that's kind of a good question. But we've been looking up there ever since. We've been looking up there. The mainstream religion has been looking up there. Somewhere else. It's not here. But if Jesus was referring to the sky, he would not also have compared heaven to a hidden treasure. You don't hide the sky very well. It's just right there in your face. You can't miss it. There's nothing hidden about the sky. So he's talking about something else. When he talks about the kingdom of heaven, think of it as the vast, limitless dimension that is centered in all of us. He says it doesn't come through observation. You don't say it's low here, low there. The kingdom of God is within you. And that's nearly an impossible concept to grasp from mainstream thinking, because we're taught that it's up there and it will be coming. So the kingdom of heaven refers to our interconnection with the infinite, the vastness of the within. And most people don't even begin to get this because they try to look within. All of us have done this, try to find that inner experience. And what we hear is that obnoxious, loudmouth voice that is that, I think it was Carlos Castaneda's that called it internal dialogue or something, chatter, I don't know what he called it, but something. We all know what it is. We're very familiar with it. It's just chattering away all the time. And you sit down and you close your eyes, it gets louder. And that's another thing I appreciate about Eckhart Tolle is he says, you know, maybe you can't do that. Maybe you can't sit down and be still and find your peace that way. That's why in my book, The Complete Soul, I devoted a chapter to a number of meditation practices, not just the sitting down and being still. That's included there, and it's very important, and we get to the point where we will do that. But you can also walk. You know, you can also do simple things that Tolle just says, you know, acknowledge your breath. Just be present with your breath for several breaths. You know, just bring yourself, when you're upset about something, bring yourself into this moment and find that peace. If nothing else, you prove to yourself that you can do it. That the peace that you're looking for is within your reach. You know, that's a very important thing to know. So the kingdom of heaven truly is like a treasure hidden in the field of our being. That's why I like this verse. It is within the reach of any who recognize where to look and then become open-minded enough to engage in the process of finding this inner kingdom. And that's where we're going to head toward today, is toward enlightenment in this regard. When this connection becomes clear to us, we undergo the process of selling our possessions, our preconceived notions about God and ourselves and our place and purpose in life. We eventually begin to experience this kingdom we seek. Now, if you're not experiencing the kingdom, this is what I want to reassure you with today. That's okay. And I think maybe this next, As we consider the meaning of the term spiritual enlightenment, the parable offers two possibilities. The first is when the man finds the treasure. The second is when he finally buys the field. Most would probably associate ownership of the field with the enlightened state. This would indicate the permanent condition that we strive for. But think about that, and think about your own experience in relation to that. Not everybody would understand what has drawn you to this type of thinking. You ever met somebody that may not understand it? When I first found Lessons in Truth, I gave it to several people, and they didn't get it. So it requires a certain amount of vision to be able to recognize this treasure in the first place. And what I would put forward is to say that anyone who gets the inner thing, who maybe has been down the road of waiting for God to drop out of the sky, and come to realize that, okay, I don't own this treasure yet, but I know where it is. The inner thing makes a lot of sense. And I've thought many times about that. Why was it at age 16 I read the book Lessons in Truth and it just set me on fire? Why? Why not other books? Why that one? What was it about the ideas? And I could not have explained why to anybody when I found it. I just knew it was true. I knew it was right. It felt right. I had discovered something unlike anything I had discovered before in the spiritual, psychic, any type of book or teaching that had to do with the unseen and had to do with me. It made perfect sense that God was within me, but I couldn't explain it to anyone. Why would I think that's true when you're being taught, the Bible says this and the Bible says that? And you got to believe that because that's your training, that's your background, that's your culture. So what happened to me, and I think what happens to everyone that's in this type of thought, because we have an alternative, we can go run with the herd, we can run with the large number of people, the majority that's out there that believes a certain way. So why did we step on another path that is less travel, as Frost said? Why would we do that? And the answer in my thinking is that we were enlightened enough to recognize this treasure. We don't own it yet. Maybe we don't have that consciousness where we have bought the field and we live there. But you can't see the treasure if you have not been enlightened. And what's more interesting about this is that level of enlightenment that you have, it was not given to you. It was not taught to you by anything that you studied. For some reason, you picked up a book or you heard somebody speak one day and you said, that's right, I like that. There's something true about that. And whatever caused you to step from the more traditional path to one that is not as popular and is not highly understood, says that you saw the value of that treasure. You recognized the value of the treasure. And one thing we don't see in the parable is how many people stumbled over that treasure and didn't know what it was. They made a pretty amazing discovery in Göbekli Tepe, Turkey. There was a rock sticking out of the ground that was a pain to the farmers that were plowing. And they plowed around it for many years, I guess. But an archaeologist from Germany decided to take a look at it and dug it up. And it is a site that predates what is considered civilization. It goes back 14,000 years, at least. And they only have a very small part of this place dug up. So a lot of people stumbled over that treasure. And look it up online, Göbekli Tepe. 2 words, Göbekli Tepe. And you'll see it's these monoliths, these stone monoliths, they buried it. Acres and acres of this site. They physically buried the whole thing so it would be protected for whatever reason. Nobody knows. But it's an incredible story. But people stumbled over that rock for years. And somebody finally saw that, it was chiseled maybe a certain way that wasn't normal, didn't look natural. So he started digging. You wouldn't believe how big these things are. And that somebody would go to the trouble of chiseling out all these figures on these huge stones, setting them up and then burying the whole thing. It's just, there's things like that in our past that we just don't really know who we are. I'm convinced of that. There's so much about how people did things back then that we cannot explain today. But that was a treasure buried in a field, literally, that people stumbled over. They stumble over. And then when someone started thinking maybe this is something different, something more, they uncover this whole thing. And I think that's how I feel with my discovery of this spiritual path. I couldn't go back to the old way of thinking for anything. Just couldn't do it. I think I have sold enough of my possessions, that is my former beliefs, where I couldn't purchase it back anyway. I bought into this whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. But it doesn't mean I live in that consciousness all the time. But what makes me enlightened and what makes you enlightened, I'm not saying this in any kind of a braggadocious way, any kind of egotistical way. What allowed me to see the value of this treasure is something in me was ready for that. And I recognized it when I saw it, and I didn't even know why I recognized it. I'm sure the archaeologists that saw this stone said, there's something different about this. I don't know what it is, but it's worth investigating. And the deeper they dig, the more profound it becomes. But this place, it's in circles. It's built in circles, and they think there's like 10 of these huge circles. They've got one of them dug up, I think. So there's a lot there that we're waiting. But there's so much unrest over there, and that may settle down somewhat. But it's hard to dig over there, I guess, at this moment. But we've been striving for ownership of this field ever since we began our spiritual quest. Many see spiritual enlightenment as a condition that with enough study and work they will one day achieve. But let's switch the focus to the man who discovers the treasure and knows where it's hidden. This man is enlightened enough to recognize the value of the treasure, to know where it's located, and to know what to sell in order to acquire the field. Can't the same be said for you and me? When we're talking about this inner thing, we're enlightened enough to recognize, to know where it's located. Could you ever go back to thinking that God is up in the sky someplace and that the answers you seek, you send your prayers up and hopefully they'll get up there? And you may not fully understand how that connection is made. But I, for one, could never turn back to thinking of God as the old man in the sky, other than the habitual, that obnoxious voice that I hear shouting. He says it once in a while. But you can't go back, I know where it is. I know it's within me. I know it's within my reach. And I know what to sell in order to acquire the field. And that loud, obnoxious voice is one of those possessions. What stands between myself and knowing that inner presence on a permanent level? I know it's nothing outside of myself that I need to get rid of, I need to sell. It's self-perception, it's self-image. There are things that are blocking me from having that experience. And I know basically what those things are. Every time you get upset about something, don't you know, maybe an hour later you kind of know what got in your way and how maybe you may not want to do that next time. We know that the things that are most upsetting to us are our reaction to things. We know that, but we don't always, we're not fully purchasing that field yet. We're not ready to sell those things that get in our way, but we know what it is. And that's a huge step, to know what the problem is, because what if you think you're the victim of everything that occurs on this planet, and we've got to fix all those problems out there before we can be happy and be peaceful, before we can experience a life with some depth to it and meaning? What if we think it's somebody else doing it to us, and that we have to resolve that first before we are able to enjoy what we think is possible? You don't have anything to sell there. It's not your problem. It's not your possession. But you come to a point in this thinking that if the kingdom is within me, then there's something within me that's blocking my experience of that. You don't have to know what that is to know where it is. Knowing where it is a sign of enlightenment. And so we need to start giving ourselves credit, for that level of awareness. I think it's very important. This describes each one of us. You're on a quest for self-discovery. If I were to say, what's the most important thing from a spiritual point of view that you could actually accomplish? Wouldn't most of us say self-discovery, discovering who I am as a spiritual being? Don't I put most value on that? Doesn't mean I'm always engaged in that process, but that would be my answer. Find yourself. Be true to yourself. We like that phrase, and we're drawn to it because we know it's true. So we know we're on a quest for self-discovery. This thing we call the spiritual path, that's what it is. We're waking up to our spiritual self. We know where to look. We know where it is. We've read enough books to know they all start sounding the same after a while, even though they're still good to read. We still like the inspiration we get. But probably most of us have not read anything new for quite a while. We've probably read a new book, a new way of saying something we already know. But we probably have not actually heard or read some new principle that we don't already know. It's just like it's been reaffirmed. I've said before, if you take all your books and look at them and see what the highlights are, that's the gospel according to you. We highlight them because we agree with what it says. Something in us agrees with it. And that guy or that gal wrote it, put it in words, said what I have felt for a long time. So you're on a quest for spiritual self-discovery. You know to look within, and you're aware of, I need to get rid of my ego. I need to get rid of the qualities of ego. Something like that. We may not get rid of them yet. They're still our possessions, but we know what to do. So I think it's a helpful way to see our path, see ourselves on our path, and stop discrediting ourselves by saying, I'm not enlightened yet. You couldn't be on this path if you weren't. That's my opinion.
You've been watching a talk presented by Reverend Doug Bottorff at Independent Unity here in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. We would like to thank everyone who joined us here today, as well as those of you who joined us online. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel, and be sure to share it with those you think who might benefit from this message. If this brought value to your life, please consider donating to us on PayPal. Thanks again for watching.